Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our first JSA screencast. Actually, my first JSA screencast ever. So hopefully you guys find it informative. We're going to break up the topic of Congress into two major parts. So today what we're going to do is take a look at how Congress is organized, how it's set up, kind of the leadership of it, and this whole system that's designed in Congress called the committee system. Our second screencast that I'm going to kind of post probably later in the week is going to focus more on how legislation actually moves through Congress. So you have to understand how Congress is organized and how it's set up in order to understand how legislation kind of moves through Congress. So I would treat this just like you would treat a lesson in class. Try and take some good detailed notes. And I'm going to ask you guys maybe to kind of pause the video at certain times to try and do like little mini activities that similar to things that we might do while we're going through a lesson in class. So what we're going to start with is the leadership system of the House and the Senate and how it's set up. So in class we left it pretty basic. We said that Congress is divided up through the Great Compromise from the Constitutional Convention of 1787 into the House of Representatives and the Senate. And we talked about, first of all, that the House of Representatives is based off of population in the state, has a lot more members, 435 members. The Senate is equal representation, 100 members, 2 from each state. Their terms of service are a little bit different, and some of the requirements are slightly different for a House member and a senator. So one of the things we didn't talk about is kind of like how the House of Representatives is organized kind of further and the Senate is organized further. So one of the things that you should kind of I guess realize is there's a significant amount of people in both of these chambers of Congress. The House has 435 people, the Senate has 100 people. It's too large of a group of people to, I guess, get functional and productive debate and discussion done with everybody discussing different issues all at the same time. So they have to come up with a way to kind of organize the system and organize both chambers of Congress. So what we're going to start with first is the leadership that they've set up. So if you take a look here, this is the leadership on your, I guess it would be your left-hand side, will be the Senate, and then you have the House of Representatives on the other side. It's kind of showing you the leadership structure of both houses of Congress. So if you kind of take a look at it, why don't you just pause the video for a second here and take a look at it and kind of look at what do you think they mean by majority leader, minority leader? What are they referring to when they talk about these different positions? So if you pause the video, hopefully what you thought about and what you were able to come up with was they're really talking about, when they say majority, let's say majority leader or the minority leader, they're referring to political parties at the time. So when they say, for example, in the Senate majority leader, what that refers to, let's say, for example, the Republican Party holds the majority in the Senate, which they currently do. Senate Republicans are going to vote for who they want to be their majority leader. So and same thing would be vice versa for the minority leader in the Senate. That refers to, in this case, would be the Democrats. Democrats in the Senate will vote, and they vote for who they want to be their minority leader of their party or represent their party as leadership in Congress. So one of the interesting things that you want to note here, a lot of these positions are related to your political party. House Majority Leader, House Minority Leader, House Majority Whip, House Minority Whip. Those all refer to which political party is in power and or has the majority and which political party is in the minority at the time. That's one interesting thing that you should note about a lot of these positions. Second interesting thing you should note about a lot of these positions is they imply a two-party system. If you notice, there's only a Senate majority leader and a Senate minority leader. Same thing on the House side. House majority floor leader, House minority leader. They don't really kind of, I guess, quantify or put into place a system for a major third party. And I guess that has to do with the tradition of the United States and how long a two-party system has been popular within the United States. So one of the things that you also want to kind of note down about this leadership structure that they've created in Congress, this is not, most of this, a small amount of it, but most of it is not in the original Constitution because it's based, a lot of these positions are based off of political party. If you remember when we discussed the Constitutional Convention of 1787, they didn't really account for political parties at the time. They didn't really foresee America necessarily having political parties. A lot of the founding fathers are against political parties in general, like George Washington and some other famous Americans. So this system is not a part of the Constitution, a lot of these things. This is more done by acts of Congress, custom and laws that Congress created for how to basically organize themselves as the years went on over time. And so that's, I think, kind of an interesting aspect of it. So you can think of this in much the same way you think of the president and his cabinet. The cabinet is not in the Constitution. Neither is a lot of this structure of how both the Senate and the House of Representatives is organized. And I think that's kind of an interesting aspect of this whole leadership structure. So when you look at this, I'm going to go through each position, pretty quickly, just to give you an idea of what each position does. So first, let's take a look at the Senate side. So if you look at the Senate, actually the head of the Senate is supposed to be the Vice President of the United States. That's what the Constitution basically says. Now, the Vice President basically never goes to the Senate, though. He or she is really only there when they need to kind of break a tie. So if there's a 50-50 tie, like a 50-50 tie between, in the Senate, the Vice President is going to vote to kind of break the tie. Other than that, he very rarely goes down to Capitol Hill. And the Vice President mostly spends most of his time in the White House. So it's more this is more like a figurehead kind of leader of the Senate. They're not there on an everyday basis, kind of like running procedure and kind of deciding which bills go to the floor. That's not really what the President of the Senate does. Similar, the next position below is something called the President pro tempore, and this is simply just the senior ranking member of the majority party. So it's the person who's been in the Senate the longest, and technically they're kind of the head of the Senate, but again, they're more, I guess, of a figurehead in a lot of ways than the actual person who holds a lot of sway within the Senate and is making a lot of leadership decisions within the Senate. The person in the Senate who actually has the most power, I guess I would say, is the Senate Majority Leader. So the Senate Majority Leader is voted into the position by other fellow senators. So only, for example, let's say in this case, the Republican Party holds the majority. The Republican Party votes for, all Republican members in Congress vote for who they want to be the Senate Majority Leader. That person then holds that position, and that position kind of entails some leadership roles, delegating bills to different committees, which we're going to talk about a little bit later in this screencast, and then also in our screencast later in the week. Same thing is true for the Senate Minority Leader. The Senate Minority Leader is voted in by the minority party. So in this case, it would be the Democratic Party in the Senate currently, and all the Democratic members of the Senate vote, and whoever they vote for becomes the Senate Minority Leader. These two positions, the Senate Majority Whip and the Senate Minority Whip, they're more, their position is more about they call them the whip because they're supposed to whip up the vote and get people to vote for certain actions, either in favor of their party, things that legislation that their party really is in favor of. So they're kind of like a more secondary position. These two, the Senate Majority and Senate Minority Leader, are the faces of their political party in the Senate. Okay, now on this side, the head of the House of Representatives is the Speaker of the House. The Speaker of the House is voted in by the majority party. Okay, so in this case, the Democrats control the House of Representatives. They just voted in a new Speaker of the House, which is Nancy Pelosi. And so all of the Democrats in Congress, in the House of Representatives vote, and whoever they vote for becomes the new Speaker of the House. And that changes every time that there's a new election within the House of Representatives. So every 2 years in the House of Representatives, the Speaker of the House may change. In the Senate, it's more along the lines of, depending on the situation, it could be every 2 years, 4 years, or 6 years if the majority party happens to change in that election. And then they have similar positions like the House Majority Floor Leader, House Minority Leader, and all of these are elected positions by exclusively, let's say, for example, in this case, the minority leaders are elected by the Republican Party, the majority leaders are elected by the Democratic Party. So that's kind of like the leadership setup of Congress. Now, the major kind of structure within Congress below the leadership, this is where most of the work in Congress is done, is something called the committee system. So when you think of Congress, we tend to think of like this large group of people. Let's say the House of Representatives is 435 people. Yes, bills are debated on the full floor of the House and the full floor of the Senate with, different senators coming up and giving speeches and different House members coming up and giving speeches. But that's not where a lot of legislative work takes place. A lot of it is done in much smaller groups called committees. So the best way, I guess, to think about it is, like, say, for example, in class. You have 34 students in class. If I give it a task out, sometimes it's much easier to kind of break the task up to different groups so that we can more easily get the job done. And so that's basically how Congress sets up its structure and its system. They have different committees. So there's three major different types of committees that you could have. First one is called a standing committee. A standing committee is the one we're going to go into the most detail with. This is a permanent committee that is always in existence. Okay, and essentially they're going to become specialists in certain types of areas of government. For example, like you'll have standing committees on agriculture, defense, finance. So they kind of like make little expertise groups about certain topics. And then, when bills get introduced to the floor, they're going to allocate those specific bills to committees that specialize in that specific area. And so in the House, you have certain standing committees, and in the Senate, you have certain standing committees that are always kind of in existence. Other types of committees that exist, like a select or a special committee, these are created for special, as the name kind of implies, special or select events that are taking place, or maybe investigations that are taking place. And usually they're not permanent. They're usually temporary. Some of them could end up being permanent, but for the most part, they're probably there for a temporary reason, to investigate something or to kind of, go further into a different topic or a resolution that's needed in the time. A joint committee. This joint committees are committees that have members of both the House and the Senate on them. So you have, from time to time, different joint committees. A lot of times joint committees will be created for a purpose of resolving differences between a bill that passes the House and passes the Senate. And those specific types of joint committees are called conference committees. So, those are in existence, from time to time, and some of them are permanent as well. So we're going to spend a little bit more time on standing committees and kind of get an idea of like what standing committees actually exist in the House of Representatives and exist in the Senate. So if you look here, this is a comprehensive list of the different standing committees in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. In the House, you have 20 major standing committees, and in the Senate, you have 16 major standing committees. So what I want you guys to do is pause the video here, and I want you to do two different things with the list. First, I want you to try and find the committees in the House and the Senate that correlate with each other. If you look, there are committees in the House that correlate with committees in the Senate. So see if you can find the ones that correlate with one another. And the second thing I want you to do when you pause the video is figure out what you think are the most important significant committees in the House and the most important significant committees in the Senate. All right, so hopefully you took my advice and you paused the video there for a second. So if you notice, there is correlation, right? Basically, in the House of Representatives, there is a committee that relates to a committee in the Senate, and that's done on purpose so that when legislation goes through different houses, they basically have their sister committee in the other side that's kind of looking at similar pieces of legislation. Now, important committees. So on the House side, most of the most important committees have to do with financial things and taxation. So on both sides, a very powerful committee is the Appropriations Committee. And also finance, committees that deal with taxation, really that power of the purse that Congress has been given. Those are really considered to be the most important committees. But a lot of these other committees, they have their moments as well. Now, when you look at this in general, each committee, so senators and House of Representatives members are assigned to different committees. And you might be assigned to multiple committees in Congress. And each committee has its own kind of focuses, as you can see. All right, we're running out of time a little bit, so we're going to kind of cut it there with the committee system, and we'll pick up next time with legislation, how it moves